Hi, my name is Sam Robinson. I'm a sophomore here at the University of Notre Dame, and today I will be interviewing Professor Busby, a professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas and a former senior climate advisor to the Department of Defense. Could you summarize your seminar and highlight your main argument?
Sure. So climate change is now such an important problem that I think it needs to be elevated in our understanding in international relations. And in classic international relations theory, we have this concept of anarchy, and it means something a little different than we kind of casually use it, which is sort of the absence of order. In international relations, we think of anarchy as a structural constraint that all countries in the world have to respond to, and it means the lack of a centralized enforcement authority in the international system. So since there's no overarching world government, states have to take care of themselves. And what I'm arguing in this presentation is that climate change has now become such a feature of the international system that all states have to respond to it, and if they don't, they do so at their peril.
Yeah, so in your read ahead, obviously, you talk a lot about how climate change has become a structural reality of the international system. Could you potentially expand on that and touch upon how it differs from other challenges like other international challenges like pandemics?
Sure. So what it has in common with pandemics is the fact that it's like an actorless threat. It's not something that any state tries to intentionally bring about. And so on that level, climate change and pandemics both could be treated as severe problems that all states have to deal with. The difference is that pandemics sort of come and go, and climate change is an accelerating and indelible feature of the international system that we're going to be living with and dealing with for the remainder, certainly my lifetime, probably yours, probably your kids, and well beyond that. And so that's why it's a little bit different than pandemics.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So then I guess kind of building off that idea of the ever-present nature of climate change, how should we approach the question of state adjustment to climate change, especially when you have certain states, at least, who perceive the threat of climate change to be outweighed by the economic benefit of fossil fuels or other energy practices?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there are two different pieces of it. One sort of set of costs that we have to acknowledge are the costs of action and inaction to the impacts of climate change, the physical effects of climate change, from accelerating droughts to floods to extreme storms. All of those impacts require us to adapt to them, because if we don't adapt, the consequences could be so severe. For example, we saw climate-related extreme weather events like Hurricane Helene buffeting western North Carolina last year, or the wildfires that affected California early this year. All of those kinds of problems are ones that if we leave our societies unprepared, we will face huge costs. And there are things that we can do at relatively low cost in resilience and investments in building codes and early warning systems that don't cost a lot, but will save us a lot in relatively short order. The other kinds of costs that are associated with dealing with climate change are the costs of the clean energy transition and decarbonizing and moving away from fossil fuels. And here I would argue that it's a bit of a false choice to frame it as the costs of the transition are too great, because in reality, the cost of clean energy technologies like wind and solar and electric vehicles have come way down. And so on some level, they're the cheapest sources of energy. And what we're currently trying to do, at least in this country and in some other countries, but in this current moment right here in the United States, is we're trying to turn back the clock, and we're going to end up paying more for more expensive energy sources, which are going to be coal and natural gas. Natural gas is still a bit more affordable than coal at the moment, but we're going to pay more for electricity than we otherwise would, when the cheapest sources of new electricity that are available are wind and solar. And over the life of having an electric vehicle, it's increasingly cost effective to own and operate one compared to an internal combustion engine. Now, there are other challenges associated with, where you charge them, but I think if we think about this in a broader way, we realize that transition to renewables and electric vehicles at this point in human history is inevitable. It's not a question of whether, it's when. And so there are going to be some transition costs, but I for one would rather be ahead of the curve and not leave it to our rivals and adversaries to dominate those technologies of the future.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that you brought up this idea of adaptation. Mm-hmm. Do you ever think that there will be an instance in which states will have at least believed that they've properly adapted to the threat of climate change, either through this clean energy transition or through the construction of a climate resilient infrastructure, to the point where climate change isn't necessarily a structural reality of the international system anymore, at least not perceived to be so?
I'd like to get to that point. We're so far away from it, it's hard to imagine. I think that one thing that we can think about is any investments in adaptation, whether it be like physical infrastructure, like you're building up coastal barriers, or even investing in sort of natural processes like mangroves as a source of flood resilience. A lot of those things require constant upkeep and renewed investments later on when they wear out, and so it's almost like we're on an inevitable endless treadmill of investments and then reinvestment to protect ourselves. And so I don't know if we can ever sort of get too comfortable, because particularly if we don't do enough to reduce greenhouse gases, the impacts of climate change will get that much worse. And so we'll be in a situation in which the early measures that we've taken to adapt to climate change won't be enough to stave off the climate impacts we're facing. So, maybe in the best case scenario world, we make a lot of investments up front in adaptation and we move to clean energy technology rapidly, and then we can be more comfortable. But we're so far away from that in the current moment, and the trajectory we're on is not great that I wouldn't bet the farm on it.
Yeah, no, understandable. I guess then I wanted to touch upon kind of some of your past professional experience, particularly your time as a senior climate advisor with the Department of Defense. So how did you see these questions of climate change and this kind of growing idea of critical mineral security influence the strategies, the strategic decisions within the Department of Defense when thinking about our collective national security?
Sure, thanks. A great question. So from 21 to 2023, I worked in the department first to do a defense climate risk analysis to see what climate change would mean for U.S. national security. And then the second piece that I worked on was the national defense strategies, thinking about what ways climate change will affect the strategic context for both the U.S. and the department. And that included impacts on military bases of climate change. That included concerns about energy efficiency and how trying to use energy resources more efficiently could make it easier for the department to fulfill its mission. And then also thinking about the impacts of climate change on allies and partners, as well as how climate impacts might alter the strategic context vis-a-vis adversaries. So those are the kinds of strategic questions that we were thinking about and trying to deal with, and then begin to implement certain policies to address. The critical minerals piece and the industrial base of the country, as we think about what are the core contributors economically to sort of military technologies, that was a little bit in the piece that came out in 2022, but was a little understated. And since that time, there's become an increased awareness of U.S. vulnerabilities, of dependence on competitors for a lion's share of minerals. China dominates the processing of critical minerals, including rare earths, but also others. And with relations with China and the U.S. becoming increasingly difficult, that dependence has become seen as more of a liability. And so the U.S. is, through the department's leadership, is trying to figure out ways to de-risk, if not decouple from China, but to have other options. And some of those options are production of minerals and processing of minerals domestically, we call onshoring, and some of that is through sourcing from friends or allies. And so you see the department now taking those steps, and it's even taken an ownership stake in a number of different mining companies to try to give those companies long-run capital and confidence that they could mine domestically and have a market for their products, which the mining industry there has a lot of challenges of doing that. Some of those things are probably necessary. Otherwise, those investments might not be made.
Yeah, no, understandable. I guess those are all the questions that I really have for you today. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak with me and coming to speak to all of us here at Notre Dame and the O'Brien Notre Dame International Security Center. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.